Welcome back to my channel. It's Emma and I'm very excited for today's video because it's going to be a very cozy little ramble through some books that I think are perfect for winter in general and the holiday season. This is going to be another really fun themed episode of the Rex Room where I recommend you books. In this case, half of them are books that I have read and loved and think are perfect for winter and snow and curling up by the fireplace and reading, and the other half are books that I really want to read either in December or the winter or this whole season and think that I'm really gonna love, and I've also heard a lot of other people praise them so highly and hope that you guys will like them too. So I have a list of 10 very cozy, very wintry, and very cold books to recommend you. Most of these are lighthearted and I hope they lift your spirits and keep you warm during the winter season. We have classics, we have middle grades, we have a book of poetry, and we have some young adult that I really love. Let's just get into it. I'm filming this video extremely early in November, but we just had a huge snowfall last night, yesterday, and it's still falling hard today, so I felt like I should just sit down and do it. I'm just gonna start with a very large book. I actually read this book last year from the end of October until I think the beginning or middle half of December, and it was such a nice compliment to the cold winter days that crept in. It is a very long book, but I just feel like December is always the month that I feel the most motivated or the most compelled or the most ready to tackle any big books on my TBR, because it seems like a very slow, comforting, meandering month where I feel so safe and cozy and curled up just sitting and really taking my time with the book. So this first one is quite the big recommendation, but I think it is well worth it. It is an extremely rewarding book and I absolutely adore it with all my heart, and that is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. There's so much I associate in my mind with Christmas and the holidays and winter with Russian classics and Russian Christmas music, and of course I always play the soundtrack to Tchaikovsky's The Nutcracker all the time during Christmas. It's one of my most played Christmas albums. But Anna Karenina I think is just so perfect because it is a huge encapsulating novel of love and grief and nature and people and family connections. It is also so nice throughout the course of this book not only to follow the characters and their changes, but to follow the changing seasons through Tolstoy's eyes in Russia. It is so wonderful. Even if he's describing a warm summer day, because this book takes place over quite a long time, there's so much coziness and warmth within it, and when we get to the winter months and we get to Christmas and we get to the very cold days, Tolstoy takes on such a way with words when he describes things, and it makes you feel so cozy. Even the cover looks very cozy. But if you don't know what Anna Karenina is about, although we are following the title character, this is actually a book that follows and leads along two different love stories, that between Anna Karenina, who is a married woman. However, she falls in love with this young man named Vronsky, and then of course on the other side we are following Kitty and Levin as the relationships that these four people form with each other and with a whole host of other characters in this novel, because as you can imagine we have quite the dense cast of characters, but they're all so memorable, so fully formed, and Tolstoy is such a master at creating these real people and these real settings and these real dialogues. Anna Karenina is definitely quite a big journey to take, but I think taking it with the complement of the weather, if maybe where you live is cold and there's howling winds and there's frost and gale and snow, it is such a welcome companion to have, I think, and it was such an experience reading it during the winter months for me, so I would highly recommend this book. I think it's beautiful, it's wonderful, and I hope to read it again very soon. This next book has quickly become one of my favorite young adult reads of the year, and that is The Castle in the Clouds by Kirsten Gier. This one is translated from the German, and we are following this young girl named Sophie No, that's the wrong book. This Sophie is named Sophie Spark, and she's just graduated. She doesn't really know what to do. She's not following the path that all her friends are taking, which is to go straight into college. So she actually winds up taking this internship at this remote, isolated hotel, very luxurious, very huge, grandiose, fantastic hotel up in the Swiss Alps. It's quite a romantic location, but her job is quickly neglected and relegated to that of looking after the very rich children of the guests and patrons of the Castle in the Clouds, which is the hotel. When I went into this book, I was really not sure what to expect, other than the fact that I knew that it was a winter, snowy, maybe some semi-romance in there. I didn't know what was gonna happen. This book turned into such a fantastic time. It was so cozy, it was so humorous, it was so quirky, one of the quirkiest books I've ever read, and certainly one of the most charming books as well, because Sophie Spark is such an earnest, compelling, wonderful character to follow, and the different hallways of this hotel is kind of like the different lines that the story follows. There's romance, there's intrigue, there's elements of a mystery, there's elements of a thriller in this book, there's elements of the fantastical and supernatural even. It was just quite a mixing of every single genre, and I loved it so much. I actually read this during the summer, I believe, and I was so disappointed, and I just wished I could read it again in the winter, so I've actually asked for it for Christmas, because this does follow the characters in this book, of which we have a whole host. We have all the workers and employees of the hotel, we have all these rich guests, and they all get snowed in and trapped over a period of Christmas, and then we followed them into the new year, and there's just so much festivity and spirit and light in this hotel where you're never really sure what you're gonna find. I was so pleasantly surprised, so happy with everything that went down in here, and it's been one of my favorite young adult books of the year, so I would highly recommend The Castle on the Clouds. Next up, we have a book that's been on my winter TBR for a while now, and that is Snow Country by Yasunari Kawabata. This Japanese author was actually the first ever to be awarded the Nobel Prize Award for Literature, which is so exciting, and Snow Country, so many people have just said that it is the perfect book to read in the winter, of course, because we are also set at a remote, isolated location up in the hot mountain springs. This one also ends quite tragically, and there's so much about the theme of what is going on with what is mirroring the weather. I love that topic and that exploration and that human emotion and kind of the emotions of nature and of the seasons being reconciled and paralleled with each other, and I think that is just like so powerful, so interesting to explore, especially around the winter months, because winter is, I always say that fall is my favorite season until I see the first snowfall of winter, and then I'm like, wait, it's winter. So I just love seeing that theme explored so much, because winter is my favorite season, hands down. Final answer. This one we're also following a tragic love story, because we have Shimamura, who is a wealthy man, and when he visits the isolated hot springs, he forms and starts this relationship with Komako, who is a geisha. She enters into this relationship with him even knowing that it is doomed to end, that it can't last, that it is fragile and won't go beyond anything that they're experiencing up at the hot mountain spring. So I have no idea other than that what this book is about. Recently I've heard a lot of people talking about it and saying how beautiful and heartbreaking this book is and how wonderful the writing is. There's one passage just from the introduction to this book that I think is so beautiful and kind of explains the title a little bit, but it says, "In the winter, cold winds blow down from Siberia, pick up moisture over the Japan Sea, and drop it as snow when they strike the mountains of Japan. From December to April or May, only the railroads are open, and the snow in the mountains is sometimes as much as 15 feet deep. The expression snow country, then, does not mean simply country where snow falls. It means very specifically the part of the main island that lies west of the central mountain range. It suggests long gray winters, tunnels under the snow, dark houses with rafters black from the smoke of winter fires, or to the more imaginative, life divorced from time through the long snowbound months." I love it. I love it. So that is Snow Country. I'm really looking forward to this. I might see if I can squeeze it onto my December TBR, so that is that one. Next, we all know I had to include the essential middle grade polar fantasy for the winter time, for the season, which is The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman. I actually read this year in February, and I loved it. It was really good. I'd not previously read or seen The Golden Compass, the movie, so when I got to the book, I wasn't really sure what I was expecting, but I loved it. The series is called His Dark Materials. I'm sure you've heard of it, but if you haven't read it, I would highly recommend. We are following this young girl named Lyra, and there is a lot going on in her world. She lives near Oxford. Her uncle is an explorer in the Arctic, and she has always wanted and begged him to take her along with him on his voyages. Little by little, she begins to get these whiffs and hears these things that are being said about some operations or some shady things that are going up in the north. And when a woman arrives at Oxford promising to take Lyra up north, she is overjoyed and quickly becomes her biggest fan and admirer. We follow Lyra as she is quickly discovering that her world is basically not as it's been told to her, that there's lots of people she can't trust in it. It is a very heartbreaking novel, but it's also a book where I just loved Lyra so much and her demon, because everyone has a demon in this world, but I really, really loved her. She was so conscious and so smart and so kind, and I just really, really loved following her. I've only read the first book in the series so far, so I am trying to get my hands on the second one so I can continue the series, because I'm also so thrilled with the aspect of this book in that it is a pseudo retelling and takes a lot of inspiration and a lot of ideas from Paradise Lost by John Milton, which I adore. I'm not really sure what's going on yet because I've only read the first one, and I know there's so much more that's going to be unraveled, so I'm not sure exactly what little parts and points are being taken from Paradise Lost, but I adore Paradise Lost. So I just think it's so cool that he's created this middle grade polar fantasy with inspiration from John Milton. So that is the Golden Compass. Next up, I have a book of poetry on here to recommend you. I think this is the perfect pick. When I got this for Christmas years and years and years ago, I actually read it during the winter months as well, and it was such a beautiful companion to have, and that is the Selected Poems of Robert Frost. And no, I did not just pick this collection of poetry from this poet simply because his last name is Frost. Of course, if you're thinking of Robert Frost, maybe you're thinking of his famous poem about the winter and the woods, stopping by woods on a snowy evening, which begins, "Whose woods these are, I think I know." If you love that poem and you see so much magic in it, and it's the one I always think of when I go out walking in the woods, or if it's dark out and it's snowing, it just feels so magical and almost a little bit like a spell that you're casting when you speak it out loud to the snow. It is beautiful. There is so much more in here like that, and Robert Frost is so famous for writing so much about geography and landscapes and nature, and there's so much beautiful, beautiful poetry like that within here. I think it's the perfect selection of poems to read around winter because there is a lot about snow and winter as a season and so much imagery of nature, and it is so beautiful. A lot of his poetry as well, and a lot that are selected in here, are ones that are very much stories and tales and almost a little bit like legends or folklore that he's putting down into verse. The poem An Old Man's Winter Night is also really nice. This one begins, "All out of doors look darkly in at him through the thin frost, almost in separate stars that gathers on the pane in empty rooms." If you're looking for a book of poetry to read in these months, maybe this one is the one for you. This next book is a book I really, really want to get my hands on. It's a bit of a newer release, and I've heard so many people talking about how sweet and how beautiful it is and how so much light is in this book, and it's actually called A Wish in the Dark, and this is by Christina Sundtornvat. I hope I'm saying that right, but this is another middle grade, and it is a Thai-inspired fantasy where we are following two characters in this world. One is Pong, who is a young boy, and he is in the prison in this city. He escapes, and Nok, who is the prison warden's daughter, runs after him, and we follow this huge chase over the city in the dark, and there's so much light and darkness, and it's actually also a retelling and draws so much inspiration from Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, so yeah, very excited about that. Both of our characters respectively learn that what they've been told and things that they've been brought up believing their whole lives are wrong. One of them, and the main thing I think that this book centers around, if I'm correct, is that the governor of the city is supposed to be, I guess, the bringer and supplier of light. Both discover that things like justice and the law and love and what is right and wrong are not always followed or always believed to be the same things by different people. So I'm really interested to see what a middle grade like this does with so much inspiration from Les Mis, because I think Les Mis brings up so many important topics and so much about privilege and classism and stuff like that. So it'll be really interesting to see that transferred into this fantastical middle grade. I think that is such an exciting playground for these ideas, and I've heard so many people love it. It is such high ratings on Goodreads as well. So, and I love reading books that are lighthearted but also contain within them very serious, important messages and ask important questions, and I think A Wish in the Dark does all of that based on what I've heard from it. So I thought I would scoot this one in here as well. Very excited to get my hands on this eventually. I think the most beautiful cover and one of the books I'm most excited to read on this episode of the Rex Room is The Enchanted Sonata by Heather Dixon Walwork. If you've been on this channel for a little bit, you might know that Heather Dixon wrote one of my favorite young adult novels, which is Entwined, which is a retelling of The 12 Dancing Princesses by the Brothers Grimm. I would also read that book around Christmas. I think it's perfect, but The Enchanted Sonata is definitely one step further because, as you might have guessed by this absolutely stunning cover, it is a retelling of the Nutcracker ballet, also with a dash of apparently the Pied Piper fairy tale. So that sounds incredibly interesting. I was first introduced to the Nutcracker when I was very young through Barbie. If you've seen the movie Barbie and the Nutcracker, I was obsessed with that film. I would rewatch it over and over and over again. And then as I got older and I discovered Tchaikovsky, and then we got to play him and perform him in high school band. That was wonderful. And then when I went into ballet, in my ballet class, we got to do a few sets of his from the Nutcracker and do a couple of the dances. I think we did Waltz of the Flowers, which was just so nice. And it's always been something that I just associate. It's like unable to be separated from Christmas and the holidays and winter and magic. So I screamed when I found out that Heather Dixon Walwork had written The Enchanted Sonata, which, this promises to be one of the most magical books I probably will ever read. I believe it is young adult, but it does say on the back it will captivate readers of all ages. So if you've never heard of the Nutcracker, or at least maybe what this retelling is based on, we're following a young girl named Clara, and life is going fine for her, but that all changes when she receives a mysterious nutcracker. This nutcracker turns out to be a real person, and after she discovers this secret, she is whisked away into his world of an enchanted empire of beautiful palaces, fickle fairies, enormous rats, and a prince. But she also has to face a magician who uses music as magic. I have very, very high hopes for this, and I would love to read it in December because it is so perfect. It is so perfect. It's also a very stunning book. The next book, which I read most recently, I adored it, is another middle grade classic that I never read until this month in November, and it was absolutely wonderful. That is A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. This was a beautiful story, and it's one that celebrates imagination and kindness above all else, and really, really hails the power of stories and make-believe and letting yourself escape into another world for a little while. And it's definitely one of the most beautiful classics I've ever read, one of the most inspiring, uplifting, and it like really helped me this month. This book was great for my mental health, as sad of a book as lots of the parts in it are. They are sad, but A Little Princess is just such a celebration of life and stories and the power that they hold and the place that they have in our lives. So if you're wondering what A Little Princess is about, we're following Sarah Crewe, and the book begins, she is 7 years old, and we see that she is basically given everything she wants and everything she could ever possibly need and not need from her extremely rich father, Captain Crewe. When the book begins, Captain Crewe is looking for a seminary and a school to leave her with when he has to voyage back to India to go back to work. Sarah is entrusted to Miss Minchin's seminary for girls, and we see that her life there isn't unhappy. She has everything she could possibly ever want. She's making friends, but all of this changes when she receives a letter that her father has died in India, and she is now penniless because he has lost all of his fortune. Miss Minchin is devastated that her star poster pupil is now reduced to nothing without her wealth, and so she assigns Sarah the duties of a scullery maid, and we follow Sarah throughout years of her life until she's about 11, where she is just everyone's servant and has to do everything that they ask of her. She is bullied and harassed and looked down on, and her life is a very, very sad one, but throughout it all, she is just the pinnacle of strength and light and kindness. As much as she is suffering, she still notices those who are suffering more than her and gives so much of herself away when she really has nothing to give. She had always wondered out loud if she was really a good kind of child or a good person, but she couldn't ever really tell because She had never gone through anything that had tested her or anything that was hard in her life, and so when everything comes crashing down around her, she really gets to find out what sort of a person she is. There was so much philosophy in this book, which was so amazing. It was such a well-written book. Again, so much about stories and imaginations and how your mindset really determines what sort of a person you are, and it was just so nice to read. Beyond all of that, it was extremely cozy. The descriptions of food and Sarah's attic bedroom and just her appreciation of the city of London and people and little comforts that she would get throughout the day, you could just really see it and touch everything in her world, even the worlds that she created within her world. And I just really highly recommend for the cold winter months because it warmed my little frozen heart and I loved it so much. I think I gave this 4.5 stars. I adored it. Next, we have a book that I am extremely intrigued about because I've heard a lot of interesting things about not only this book, but about this author. This is considered his masterpiece, and that book is The Ice Palace by the Norwegian writer Tarjei Vesaas. I'm really hoping I'm saying his name right. But this sounds like a very sinister, maybe fairy tale-esque story about two girls who meet each other for the first time this one evening as they're exploring the Ice Palace, which is this immense, huge, frozen waterfall made of ice, as frozen water is. It creates this extremely magical environment where everything is reflected and there's so much beauty within this frozen waterfall, and they meet each other this one evening and they develop such a connection with each other that the next day when one of the girls goes out to explore the Ice Palace again but doesn't return, the other girl is left shattered. Her world is falling apart. She experiences so much loss and grief over the disappearance of this one friend that she just met. So it's this really interesting exploration, I think, of these two girls and their bond, and of course the Ice Palace itself. I've heard his prose is very blunt, very subtle, but so beautiful. I'm not sure which translation of this I would like to try first, but if anyone knows, please let me know. So that is the Ice Palace. And finally, the last book on this list is one that I recently read this year, absolutely adored. Again, one of the coziest young adult books I've had the pleasure of reading. I've not heard anyone else ever talk about this, and that is The Blood Spell by C.J. Redwine. You guys know I find fairy tale retellings and fantasy extremely comforting and cozy and perfect for any holiday, so The Blood Spell is a retelling of Cinderella. It features blood magic, it features wraiths, it features witches and alchemy and magic, because Blue is a witch in that she can work kind of magic with plants, and there's so much botanical imagery and again so much nature and very cozy scenes where Blue is just cooking in her kitchen, working on her alchemy and tending the plants and flowers of her garden that she is very gifted in nurturing because of her witch's gift. But she also has to hide the fact that she's a witch because in the city where she lives, everyone fears above all else witches, because if they get too powerful and too power hungry, they can turn into blood wraiths, which will then basically just ravage and destroy the city, which has already happened in the past. This book does remind me a lot of A Little Princess as well, though, because Blue is so concerned with her city's poor and the children who have no place and no home, and she is trying to work on this alchemical reaction that will turn anything into gold so that she can give away her money to the poor of her city, even though she's not very well off herself. However, she and her father run a shop that caters to all tinctures and medicinal ingredients that anyone might need, and they are also patrons of the royal monarchy. Kellen, who is Blue's childhood kind of rival while also being her best friend, arrives back in the city in time for his coronation and his marriage ceremony, and he has to pick a bride out of everyone in the town. So you follow their two lives as they kind of connect again and get to know each other now that they're a bit more grown up, but you also follow a lot of mystery and intrigue because children from the city are going missing, people are being robbed of stuff, and there's a lot of seemingly shady things going on in the city's undercurrent. So this book just gets so good. I was in love with the writing. I was in love with the realistic portrayal of grief and loss that these young people experience in their lives, because a lot of the time I find that young adult seems to gloss over these things or doesn't do them well or really only does them as plot points, but I really felt everything that Blue was going through. I just really loved her as a character, and I just thought this was a really well done Cinderella retelling. It really made me so happy reading it, and I just really loved it. So that is the blood spill. All right, I think we finally managed to go over all the books in this episode of the Rex Room. If you guys have any winter or Christmas or holiday or December book recommendations for me, please let me know because I'm always searching for more. I hope this recommendation list helped a little bit with any hunting down of Christmas, holiday, or cold books that you are trying to find. And I hope if you do read any of them, they really, really lift your spirits and give you all of the wintry warmth that you want. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon in my next video. Ciao.